Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and your break of networking. I'm here to introduce Blake Smittkamp from AirWatch, who will be presenting on mobile devices and security. Blake is a healthcare account executive at AirWatch, a global leader and innovator in mobile security, mobile device management, and mobile application management solutions. In this role, Blake consults healthcare organizations in New England to implement MDM, mobile device management, and security solutions based on existing mobile policies and HIPAA regulations. Prior to joining AirWatch, Blake was a channel sales associate for Gateway EDI, where he managed strategic partnerships with practice management and electronic medical record vendors. And prior to Gateway, Blake worked in healthcare staffing, placing nurses and clinicians at various hospitals. Blake earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Communication Studies and Marketing from Georgia Southern University, and he currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia. So welcome, Blake, and thank you very much.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction. Blake Smittkamp, I am an account executive for AirWatch. I specifically focus on unique needs that mobile security kind of requires in the healthcare marketplace. And I specifically work with healthcare institutions, whether it's hospitals, health systems, visiting nurse associations, home health agencies, hospice organizations, to meet those unique needs that we've kind of identified within the healthcare marketplace. So what I've done today is I've kind of identified some healthcare best practices, and the agenda is kind of going to be focused on preparing for an initial evaluation of MDM vendors, what's important, some key considerations, mobile security goals. Today, usually the first round of goals is we want to secure these devices, we want to make sure they're HIPAA compliant, but what are our future goals? What are some ideal situations that we'd like to see in an MDM vendor? Reaching your goals, how are we going to get from point A to point B? What are the features and functionalities that are required today? What are the features and functionality that are going to be required 6 months down the line to really enable our end users quicker access, secure access to corporate resources on their mobile device. After that, we should have around 15-20 minutes, a lot of time. I'm going to actually go through a sample enrollment. I have an iPad here. It's hooked up to an IPVO kind of webcam. So I'll show you the differences between your typical maybe BYOD device. It's unmanaged, not syncing with any corporate resources, and what's really involved from the end user perspective to go through an enrollment. Keep it pretty simple. Simplicity really drives adoption. We found out in healthcare, if it's overly cumbersome, your end users just aren't going to adopt it. So get an idea how that'll work. We'll do some snapshots of a central management console, just so you can kind of get an idea, familiarize yourself with the capabilities that there are in the MDM marketplace. It's moving very rapidly. This has really become kind of an arms race of innovation we're seeing. So the quicker that you can develop feature A and feature B, it's moving beyond just remote black and white. So hopefully give you a good snapshot of where the market's at today and where we see it kind of going and how it's going to help healthcare organizations in the future. Some key considerations for healthcare when you're kind of going in and saying, we're allowing, maybe you just purchased a bank of iPads, 25 iPads that clinicians are going to use, or whether you've already adopted a full-fledged BYOD environment. I think these are kind of key considerations to take into account if you're going to adopt an enterprise-wide MDM solution or just maybe a smaller subset. But the first key consideration, and if I could have 6, 7, 8 bullet points on this, I would, it's understand and examine your current mobile security policies. And don't put this all on IT. A lot of times I'll see where a CIO will come in and they'll say, we've got to secure these mobile devices, evaluate 6 different vendors and let me know which one's the cheapest. And they put 100% of this burden on maybe a network administrator, some sort of technical engineer, and he gets kind of stuck in a vacuum. Doesn't really know which way he's going. Evaluates 5 or 6 different vendors, everything looks fantastic, but doesn't really understand what exactly it is that they want to evaluate and see in an MDM vendor long-term as well as kind of short-term in the interim. So bringing in other departments is something that I've seen that other health systems, hospitals have done to really be successful. It is talking to groups like human resources, talk to your legal team, talk to your clinical team, see what level of access to certain corporate resources is appropriate across different groups. is it appropriate for clinicians to access EMR on Epic Haiku, Epic Cantu, or any of the other applications that these EMR vendors are developing? And if so, how are we going to secure that? Are we going to give corporate network access, Wi-Fi networks on their mobile device? So kind of bringing in these other departments, seeing what levels of access you're going to provide, and then ultimately that'll kind of get into the next bullet point is, are these policies going to be universal, where, across the entire health system, across the entire hospital, you're going to have 5 or 6 universal policies, or are they going to differ amongst clinicians as compared to executives, as compared to doctors, surgeons, kind of on down the line? Another key point of emphasis is maximizing your current IT infrastructure and investments. With any MDM vendor, you should be able to easily integrate, whether you go in the cloud or you're deploying the solution within the 4 walls of your data center. Integrate your current infrastructure and investments, whether it's Exchange, for Exchange security and email management capabilities. Maybe you have a SharePoint, so delivering secure content to a device in a type of enterprise-grade Dropbox, where IT can remotely manage and configure documents, videos, content on the device. Moving beyond that, things like your PKI infrastructure, certificate authorities for issuing certificates to a device, for secure authentication into certain corporate resources. These are all things that really, any MDM vendor should be able to do today to maximize those current investments that you have in place. And then this is a huge key point of emphasis that I see. Obviously, usually the first phase of any MDM evaluation is bringing in security, securing the device to meet those initial HIPAA high-tech regulations. But kind of moving beyond that is also usability, finding a balance between security and end-user enablement, because the whole notion, what you kind of think about with mobility in healthcare is quicker access to needed corporate resources, so that that end user can perform their job ultimately at a higher level. But then you run into IT and security people of, well, let's take a step back for a minute. We need to secure this. So finding a solution that will kind of maintain that constant balance, it's easy for end users and isn't going to be an overly kind of cumbersome burden. A few more kind of key considerations that I've identified. Multi-tenancy in a product is absolutely critical for healthcare organizations, whether you're deploying 50 devices or 5,000 devices across an enterprise health systems. What we find a lot of times is that you might have different locations with different Wi-Fi networks, different corporate networks. You could have different domains across different locations for both email as well as things like Active Directory. So if you're integrating this, you need to be able to build out a concise hierarchy, an organizational setup to kind of match the fragmented setup of your organization. So the ability to build out different groups, distribute different corporate resources according to different groups that you've identified is something that you should take into account. Even if you are just starting off with that initial deployment of just 50 corporate-owned iPads, you never know when the CIO is going to come tug at your shoulder or tap on your shoulder and say, we're adopting BYOD, so this needs to go enterprise-wide and support up to 5,000 devices. So the ability, both short-term and long-term, when you're evaluating a solution, to support all the different cross-business functions in an organization is absolutely critical. Flexible deployment options, so it's kind of been a focus today of in the cloud-based deployments, but even if doing a cloud-based deployment is right for you day one, an MDM solution should also be able to be deployed within the 4 walls of your data center. What we're finding is there's a lot of consolidation within the healthcare marketplace. Larger entities, health systems are purchasing up these, or buying up these smaller medical centers. And you never know when those kind of deployment regulations and changes can happen internally. So, a proven track record of successful deployments both in the cloud as well as on-premise is kind of another consideration to take into account. Also, business associate agreements are changing, with the HIPAA omnibus rule that went into account. That's another thing, is what is defined as a business associate, so you never know when those are going to change. Healthcare-focused functionality, and this is obvious, things like maximizing DLP, automating the compliance process, ensuring that your email infrastructure is protected on mobile devices, that only managed devices, for example, can access your corporate networks. That's another kind of key component. And then ultimately, if devices are out of compliance, a device is not encrypted, it's found to not have a passcode on it, maybe it's a corporate-owned device, and you've identified that Facebook is a blacklisted application, they can't have that on there. What are the steps that MDM provider can provide to get that device back into a compliant state? That's all automated and isn't going to require your IT help desk to get on the phone and call that user and say, please take Facebook off your device. I noticed you just downloaded it from the Apple Store, for example. So automation in the compliance monitoring, reporting is critical for HIPAA and high-tech. They should have canned reports on everything from encryption, compliance to passcode policies, kind of your base policies, to where these reports can be distributed to relevant parties. So if you have a telecom team that needs, reporting on data usage for your corporate line of business devices to avoid bill shock, being able to distribute that to the right members of your team are things that you should take into account. Event logs, where you'll have a detailed history of all the interaction that this device is having with the management console. Things like application downloads, compliance checks, is the device encrypted? So in the event that that device was ever lost, stolen, you'll have a detailed history there that says, when this device was stolen, it was reported missing at 8 a.m., for example. We were in a compliance check 2 hours prior, the device was encrypted, had a passcode on it, and then we have an event log that says we wiped it immediately upon notification of all the corporate resources that the MDM vendor is managing on the device. Any questions about any of the considerations that I'm going through? I want this to be interactive. Okay, I'm going too quick. No? Great. Some of the common mobility goals that we're seeing in healthcare, kind of taking a step back of initially planning the project, moving to, okay, here's our goals. How are we going to get there? Obviously, the first goal usually is protecting patient privacy through mobile security, ensuring that these devices are secure, they're encrypted, they have a passcode. If they're not meeting these compliance rules, what engines do we have, what reporting, what analytics do we have to automate that process of getting it back into a compliant state? Maybe it's, if its device has been unencrypted for 6 hours, we're going to go ahead and put an automated action that it's going to be wiped of all enterprise data if the kind of offense is serious enough for that end user. Supporting a flexible platform for both your corporate as well as your personal line of business devices. So, the ability to have different privacy policies, for example, for your corporate-owned devices. Maybe on your corporate-owned devices, you're going to track things like telecom data usage. You're going to track the personal applications that are on those devices. Maybe you're going to have the right, if it is a corporate-owned device, to kind of perform a full device wipe, nuke it, if you will. Take all the personal corporate data off the device, but under no circumstances, for example, are you going to want to perform a full device wipe on a personal device. So how easy is it for you to set up these different kind of cross privacy policies for your device ownership types? Also, the ability to distribute different corporate resources. As you kind of identify amongst the different groups, are personal devices going to have access to different levels of corporate resources as compared to those corporate-owned devices? Are they going to need a separate terms of use for those different kind of line of business devices? So keeping all these in mind, if you are going to adopt a BYOD program, is certainly critical. Securely distributing those different corporate resources to different groups, just mentioned that. Scalable enough to support an enterprise-wide deployment. The ability to have different groups of users, tie it to maybe Active Directory groupings, distribute resources according to those resources, even have different enrollment processes for those different groups. It's things that we're seeing some health systems do these days. And ultimately, simplicity really does drive adoption within healthcare. So having a solution that's not only easy for the end users, it runs silently in the background, it's not going to be overly burdensome for them, is absolutely critical, but simple for your IT administrators as well. One thing that I've kind of found working with different IT teams is they have 101 different projects going on, and mobility is just kind of a pain for them as they see it. So giving them an intuitive platform, something that's not going to overly kind of suck different resources out of their bank, as well as it's not going to have a bunch of help desk tickets. You know, when they go through that enrollment process, people asking questions, it should be fairly intuitive. Also, you know, one thing that a mistake that I see some health systems do is they don't even test a product. So if an MDM vendor offers a 30-day proof of concept to go in and test these devices, I would absolutely recommend that. Use the full 30 days, test it on your internal IT team, have them go through, test the software, test the security of it, and then ultimately, you know, you should be able to also roll it out in that test period to some sample users, gauge the feedback from them, see if they're submitting a lot of help desk tickets, if it's overly burdensome, and take note on that. So, covered some of the goals. Now I'm just going to cover some baseline features that I've identified as being important to different healthcare organizations. Multi-tenant architecture, again, this is critical. I've talked a lot about it, but the whole notion of you'll have a medical center, a health system kind of at the top level here, and then you might have different locations underneath of it. Maybe it's a hospital in the southern half of the state, a hospital in the northern half of the state. So the ability to build different location groups, and then you're going to have administrators at another level here, doctors, employee-owned devices, corporate-owned devices, so on and so forth. And the whole key takeaway is, this will give you the ability to distribute those compliance regulations, those different rules and regulations, profiles, things like different email profiles for different domains across these different groupings. So the ability to go in, create this organizational hierarchy, and then ultimately, if you have separate instances and you want to create different roles for IT administrators, to go in and have an IT administrator that is only able to view and manage this instance of your MDM solution. He can only go in and change policies on the North Campus, for example, but then you'll have a global administrator who has kind of the keys of the kingdom. These are things that you also need to take into account as you look into the future of your MDM deployments. Mobile email management, huge consideration. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, that was really all other organizations were kind of considering is how do we manage the email container? Are we going to containerize email and force a pin on that and not really care what the heck they do on the rest of the device? It's kind of changed a little bit now, mobile device management. It's not just mobile email management, it's content management, application management. So a lot of different components, but email management is certainly still very important. And a consideration to take into account is, are we going to containerize email on the device? Is it 100% necessary to containerize an executive's email when there's probably a low risk that he or she has PHI on her device? Or a doctor, a nurse, or whoever that might be exchanging PHI over email has a much higher risk. Do we want to provide a containerized solution for that specific group of users? So kind of getting back to that multi-tenant architecture and distributing different policies according to risk in different groups. The ability to, with the email management solution, restrict access to corporate resources, restrict access to corporate email if devices aren't meeting those core compliance rules. So if the device is unencrypted, maybe it has a blacklisted application on it, maybe it just hasn't checked in with the central management console for 2-3 hours, and that's fishy to you. The ability to remove email access in an automated fashion are some key considerations there. Defining email compliance rules, so maybe you don't want to have Android devices that are not 2.2 and higher. They don't support device level encryption. They're not going to be given access to email, so the ability to kind of drive both unmanaged device rules where devices have to be managed before they can have mobile email access, as well as managed device compliance rules that they have to meet certain rules and regulations before they can have that access. Any questions on mobile email management? That's usually a pretty hot topic of discussion in healthcare. Automated security and compliance. So as you identify those core rules and regulations, usually it's organizations will start off with all devices have to be encrypted. They have to have a passcode on them. And then ultimately, we do not want jailbroken or rooted devices having access to our corporate resource. Jailbroken or rooted is just an end user maybe downloaded the non-market application and essentially broken the operating system of that device. Makes it more susceptible to malware, viruses, etc. So, if any of those core compliance rules are not met, when a device checks in and we're running inventory on it, what are the automated actions that we can do? Is it sending them a notification email with a custom template that says, your device is jailbroken, please remove whatever non-market application you just downloaded, or in 24 hours, we're going to remove access to email and then wipe your device of corporate resources. So there should be a fairly time-based, interval-based methodology to enforcing compliance that's really all automated. Obviously, you can set up alerts to where these alerts will be distributed to relevant IT team members, but it should really all be automated so that your IT team is not having to constantly monitor this. Multi-user management is another kind of key component that hospitals and other healthcare organizations have come to us with kind of this unique business case where we just purchased a bank of 25 iPads, and we have 150 different nurses that need to share these iPads over the course of 48 hours or whatever it is. So the whole notion is they want the device to be under management the entire time, and when nurse A gets there for his or her 8 a.m. shift, he or she enters her Active Directory, username and password into an application on the device, has all of his or her corporate resources pushed down to her email, applications, content that are all relative to their role within the organization. Device remains under management the whole time where IT can run inventories, remotely wipe it, kind of run those compliance checks on the device. And then when he or she finishes her shift, checks the device back in, wipes all of her information off the device, and then it's ready for Nurse B when they get there for the graveyard shift to come check the device out with all their credentials, have all their corporate resources. So kind of maximizing your current investments. They don't have to go out and buy 200 iPads for those 200 users, rather you can have 50, a bank of iPads that different users can utilize, and it remains under management with those security requirements pushed down on the device. The AirWatch secure browser, but when you're going through and evaluating an MDM vendor, they should have some sort of homegrown organic browser, to where if you purchase, say, those corporate line of business devices, they're going to be utilized for a specific function, and you want to block native browsing capabilities, for example, and push down a custom browser, where maybe you want to push it down in a kiosk mode, where it's just access to one website where they can share videos with patients. Maybe it's pushed down in a whitelist mode where they're just able to access 4 or 5 different websites. There's blacklisting modes to blacklist access to ESPN, etc. But another kind of key critical component is the ability for these custom browsers to proxy maybe back-end web filters for them to tunnel traffic to specific intranet sites so that they can have access to clinical web applications. And if it's a BYOD device, utilizing the custom browser for access to corporate resources, and then if you don't disable the other browser, they can use that for their own personal use. So giving you that kind of containerization of personal versus corporate browsing sessions is something that's absolutely critical. Secure content management, this is really something that's kind of starting to take off within the healthcare space specifically. The enterprise has kind of been using this for a couple of years now. We originally developed this solution for Delta Airlines and United Airlines to replace flight lockers. Previously, flight attendants as well as the pilots were carrying around briefcases with like 50 pounds of flight manuals. And they came to us with a business case of, we want to digitize these, put it on an iPad so they can have access to all their flight information, kind of in a secure container on it. So we developed this secure content locker. And as you can imagine, think of it as an enterprise-grade Dropbox where IT can control the flow and what content those users can have access to on the device. You can put DLP measures on certain sensitive documents to where they can't screenshot it, they can't remove it from this container, they can't open it in third-party applications, no screenshotting, etc. So giving that ability, and then also kind of going back to maximizing your current infrastructure, MDM vendors should be able to tie the level of access to certain documents in this content locker back to SharePoint, other network file shares, so that those users have that access to documents that's relative to their role within the organization. So, it's that kind of balance that I talked about there is securing the content in there, ensuring that they can't remove it from this container, but also giving them access in a simple format to documents, videos, PDF files, Excel spreadsheets. That's really going to help them perform their job at a higher level.
Can you also do that at the level of little applets?
The level of what?
You know how applets on an iPhone, for example, having that little program be in a locked location versus just accessible with all the other programs you have on your smartphone.
What was the application?
Well, we have one that would allow my staff to connect to our interface engine for our operation. And it's remote access where they can turn comm points on and off.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to lock that application on the smartphone down and put
Is
it in
it
the
an internal application that you've developed, or is it a?
It's one of our vendors.
It's a publicly available one?
It is, yeah.
Okay. We can put, we can make it a required application. Kind of what we do is we secure the device at the hardware level.
Yeah.
So we'll ensure that at the hardware level, this device is encrypted. It meets all the compliance checks before it can have access to this managed application. If it's ever found not to be, we're going to immediately remove.
Right.
But in order to containerize that application, in order to put a security profile on it, whether it be a PIN, an SDK, a software development kit for developers and going and changing, you would need access to the application file, so the APK file or the iOS file. So if they have access to that, you can wrap it through an engine in AirWatch that will say wrap it with a PIN, wrap it with AD access only. Or to take it a step further, if you have developers, you can utilize SDK, software development kit, and utilize APIs to build in intelligence into that application that's relevant to MDM. Like, we're going to revoke access if this device is ever jailbroken and rooted immediately to that application because we have AirWatch algorithms built into it. Any questions on the content management component? No. And this is what I talked about a little bit earlier, enabling BYOD through not only the distribution of relevant corporate resources to those different users, to the different ownership types of devices, but most importantly, the ability to, and this is kind of, you're not going to be able to see it here very well, but create privacy policies by device ownership. So in this instance, it's not very clear to see, but they're basically, IT is delegating by device ownership type what information we're going to track. So for corporate devices, we're going to track GPS, personal applications. We have the right to full wipe the device. We can track your telecom, your data usage, etc. But on the corporate business, the BYOD devices, we're not going to track any of that information, and that can all be kind of delegated at that global level within the MDM solution, so that it's a corporate-wide safety net, if you will, that you're not going to track any of that information. And then taking it a step further, as you create your terms of use and user license agreements when people are enrolling, you'll have this created and you can kind of clearly articulate to those end users, we're not going to track this information, and then you have the safety net here that under no circumstance you're ever going to track it. So that's the PowerPoint piece of the presentation on what's going to go through live enrollment here to get an idea. Is there any questions about anything that I covered in the slides or anything that didn't make sense or you want clarification on? Quiet group today.
How many healthcare customers do you have?
We have 3,000. So we say 1,500, but when you take, that's hospitals and health systems. When you take into account the home hospice, home health care, visiting nurse associations, it's well over 3,000. So it's a huge chunk of our business. I mean, we have dedicated healthcare resources, not only on the sales side, but engineers developing, healthcare specific functionality, healthcare account managers, consultants to help with those kind of unique scenarios and implementation we see, across different health systems.
So, obviously there's a lot of options when it comes to setting up.
Yes.
How much guidance does the software give you in
Getting started.
Defaults, best practices, those sorts of things?
We provide, in that 30-day POC, we'll provide you with a getting started guide with recommended best practices, passcode policies, encryption policies, etc. You'll work with an account executive to kind of set up the basics in your trial environment, test it on 20, 30 devices, whatever it is. And then as you go through, and we continue to talk about what your goals are. You can go in and do the Active Directory integration and push it out to a certain AD user group to see how it's going to function on them. But in terms of recommended healthcare best practices, we do have account managers that'll kind of walk through, let you know what other similar healthcare organizations are doing. I certainly always kind of reference my clients to, there's a Himss mobile best practices, and they have different templates for like end user license agreements, and then you can kind of use those templates and vary them across the different groups so that the right groupings are getting the right terms of use according to what you're going to do.
For the smaller organizations out there, are you aware of any kind of freeware, open source kind of software that's out there? I know TrueCrypt does that really well for like a laptop or a desktop computer.
Yeah, I don't know specifically the names of the free ones, but there are free solutions out there. I will say, 9 times out of 10, it's free like a puppy. It's
Right.
not going to be intuitive. It's not going to be easy to use. It's going to be, it's kind of saying.
But you love puppies, right?
I
That's
do
a great
love
one.
puppies. I do, but they're kind of a pain in the butt.
Like a puppy.
So yeah, I mean, it's not going to be intuitive. There's not going to
Can't help but
be
grow up.
a getting started guide. You're probably not going to have very much access to professional services to work with the implementation, your architecture. It's building of your different groupings. So I mean, even with a 25, I work with 25, 50 device deployments all the time. 200 employees at a small medical facility. They run into the same unique challenges, and they have the same challenges as a HCA, as a Hospital Corporation of America, in terms of, I want to give certain things to executives, but I don't want to give them to clinicians. How can I organize this? How do I do it? So, and a couple other things I didn't cover, the flexible deployment, flexible pricing options are things that we do offer, both in terms of subscription as well as perpetual. So if you would rather do a capital expense or an operating expense, those are other things that we do to accommodate the smaller organizations. And before I go into the actual enrollment here, I wanted to give a little bit of a frame of reference into kind of the central management console. So MDM really is what it is providing a unified platform for you to manage all your devices regardless of operating system. It doesn't matter if it's Android, BlackBerry, iOS devices, giving you kind of a unified platform to manage these different devices and access to certain levels of resources on the device. And when I talked about the multi-tenant architecture, here's kind of how we've built out this demo environment of a regional medical center. There's North Campus, South Campus locations. If you build out the tree, you'll see that there's a whole other different groupings. And kind of the key takeaway is each one of these groupings can have access to certain resources. It can have different administrators, etc. But when I enroll my actual device, I'm going to enroll as a doctor on the south end of campus. So I'm going to have those different corporate resources and subsets all pushed down to me, as well as restrictions, email domain, etc. Let me pull up the webcam here. I might need to focus the screen. So very typical of your average unmanaged BYOD device. When I unlock the device, there's no passcode on it. So with iOS devices, by enforcing a passcode, we're going to leverage the native hardware 256-bit encryption. So right now, it's an unencrypted device. I have a lot of the native applications on here. I have camera, FaceTime, photo booth, calendar, for example, is only my personal calendar. No corporate resources on the device. Email is just my personal Gmail account. There's no Exchange Active Sync on the device at this time. And then with applications, just a handful of personal applications here. No corporate applications have been recommended. So for the enrollment process, there's a lot of different options. It's a very kind of flexible architecture for enrollment. It's easy as making a posting on SharePoint for an open enrollment, giving instructions to end users. Maybe you want to email enrollment instructions, text message enrollment instructions to users. In this instance, maybe say I've been emailed, and it's as simple as following a URL that will kind of link to the server where NVM has been installed. And then in this instance, it's requiring me to enter that group identifier as a doctor on the south end of this kind of fictitious campus. And then from here, I'm just entering Active Directory username and password. In this demo environment, we've kind of integrated with our AD infrastructure. So it's my Windows username and password, something I use every single day. I'm not going to have to bug IT to get access to this information. Terms of use, this is critical. This is a customized EULA that was presented to me based on that grouping, based on my risk to have PHI on it. And it's going to clearly articulate here in HTML5 kind of my rights as an end user, IT's rights as an end user. And this can be all updated. If the terms ever change, you can prompt those users to re-accept your current terms. And then from here, it's going to go through the installation, profile installation process. So how we manage iOS devices is you configure different profiles in the console, things like a passcode requirement, Wi-Fi networks, certain restrictive profiles so that they can't have access to like the camera, for example. So now it's notified me that the enrollment was complete. So not an overly burdensome, cumbersome process really at all. It was just a couple of steps to go through the enrollment process. And as you can see, it's already started to push down applications to my device that IT has recommended based on my role within the organization. Also, kind of the most critical component is the security of the device. So before I can do anything, it's going to require a passcode on my device. So a 4-digit PIN in this instance has pushed down to the device. And based on the risk of PHI, you can make these passcodes as long, as granular, and complex as you want. So give you that ability. And as you'll notice, so those applications are pushing down to the device, but also based on kind of this user's role, they've pushed down restrictive profiles, so I can't have access to camera, FaceTime, or photo booth, and these can be tied to things like time schedules, so maybe from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, they're in the hospital ward or whatever it is, they don't need access to those, you can kind of turn them off as well as geofence them, so other things to keep in mind. Series of applications, I'll show you kind of the content management component. Again, it's an encrypted container here where IT is kind of controlling the management flow of certain documents, videos, etc. down to my device. It requires authentication into the container. And again, this can be linked to SharePoint, network file shares, etc. Give different views of content, all the content that IT has recommended to me, different PDF files. So you'll notice this one's just kind of a training document that was pushed down to me, but it's identified as a secure document. So if I try to open in a third-party application, I can't remove it from this container. I can't screenshot it, I can't print it. Whereas there's an unsecured document that maybe I can share and collaborate this with different users. And it won't be encrypted, excuse me. And I can email it, I can print it, etc. from this application. Here's the different repositories that we can integrate with. So if you have a SharePoint leveraging network file shares, they'll have that exact same folder access to relevant documents within there. As well as through a self-service portal where users can do some provisioning on their own device. They can do remote log, remote wipe if they've ever lost their device after hours. They can also provision personal content to this folder as another thing we've kind of enabled people to do. Last thing I'll show you is it also synced my Exchange ActiveSync account on here. So now I have access to my corporate email, fully managed device, and then we're running short on time here. From the management console, you'll be able to see where I just enrolled my device. Here's my iPad. We'll give you all sorts of different inventory on the security, the different profiles that were installed, certificates for authentication, applications. But if I do the enterprise wipe, we're just going to kind of sandbox those managed applications and content, etc. from the device, and we're not going to touch any of the personal information. I just requested that, and you'll notice All the corporate applications have been removed. I now have access to camera, FaceTime, and photo booths, so those restrictions have been lifted. Mailbox, I just have the personal Gmail that was untouched by the wipe. Same thing with like my, not FaceTime. My camera, it didn't touch any of my personal photos on the device, so didn't touch any personal information. Any questions?
Nice demo.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say something really quickly. I want to make sure I understand it correctly. Did you say that you can have location-based restrictions and?
We can. So it's, the APIs are there. It works better on some devices than others. Apple is a very consumer-centric type device, so they make background GPS tracking something that an end user could ultimately turn off the device unless it was provisioned with, say, an Apple configuration utility where the settings are locked in and they can't change any of those settings. So what it really requires is that location services be on, and something with the AirWatch SDK, those algorithms be running in the background, and when it checks in and identifies it's not within that geofence perimeter, it will remove those different profiles. But again, if it's an iOS device, just being honest, it may not work 100% of the time. Samsung safe devices, you can kind of provision those so that nothing can be changed. It's checking in at every half-hour interval. So it depends on manufacturer a lot of times.
Now, with all these extra services running, how's that eat the battery life? What is it?
It's literally is running silently in the background. The AirWatch agent is. Like for Exchange ActiveSync, for example, we're not tunneling that traffic back to some dock in Silicon Valley where it has to sync with those servers. We're just leveraging Exchange ActiveSync. So it's not going to affect the battery life on email. Application management, it's just a matter of downloading the applications. And like the content locker, for example, IT can set policies where they're not able to like download videos that are extra, really large, not on Wi-Fi. So it's not going to eat into those data usage, and it's really not going to affect the battery. It runs silently in the background. And if your administrator is enforcing check-ins, like every hour, that would affect the battery life. But if you have device queries, every 12 hours, it won't affect the battery life. It's no different than just launching the browser session.
What are the other mobile device supported OSs?
Yes, Apple, Android, and it's across. There's some fragmentation with Android. Android's no longer just Android. It's Samsung, HTC, Lenovo, Sony, etc. But we do support them. There's just certain capabilities and APIs that they open up to NVM to work with across those different manufacturers. Windows Phone, Windows Phone 8, Windows Mobile, we work with the ruggedized devices. I could send, kind of do a general, BlackBerry obviously work with BlackBerry as well, so pretty much all the operating systems. Is there a specific one that you had a question about?
No, but the Android stuff gets.
It does, yeah. Yeah, so there's, on the enterprise-grade Android devices, we can leverage like native email. I don't know if you're familiar with Touchdown. Sometimes that's required to provision email to non-enterprise grade, but we've actually developed kind of a unified Android email container that can work across all operating systems to kind of ease some of that pain that IT administrators go through with Android. Any other questions? Well, that's all I got. I appreciate the attention and the questions. Thank you.